Bienvenidos a Doom and Stone Latinoamérica. Seguimos con nuestros especiales. El día de hoy traemos desde el baúl una entrevista que realizamos en marzo de este año a través de Bands Channel 666, ese programa que tuvimos ahí con la marca de tenis. Y bueno, vamos a celebrar la vida y obra de un músico prolífico, maravilloso, Mr. Arthur Brown, el rey, el mismísimo God of Hell Fire. Así que bueno, parte de este especial es la entrevista que tuvimos con él, muy muy increíble. Y del otro lado vamos a estar tocando varias canciones de Mr. Arthur Brown, de su carrera, y sobre todo vamos a celebrar juntos el lanzamiento de su nuevo álbum Long Long Road. Este es una colaboración que hizo Arthur Brown. Está bastante chido, es algo increíble. Rick Patton hace un trabajo maravilloso aquí y bueno, juntos logran crear un sonido moderno, pero con las bases viejas de la música. Así que bueno, juntos vamos a escuchar lo que Arthur Brown tiene que decir. Si usted no habla inglés, híjole, hay demasiada información, se la podría resumir de cierta forma. Arthur Brown habla sobre sus inicios, habla cómo creó este personaje, cómo creó lo que conocemos como el shock rock. Justamente él quería crear un impacto, un shock en la audiencia, así que bueno, pensó en estos seres míticos, que está basado el personaje en temas de griegos. También tiene que ver mucho porque Arthur Brown participó en obras de teatro, él quería ser como actor básicamente, entonces parte de la teatralidad la trajo al mundo de la música. Y bueno, también habla de su colaboración con Pete Townshend, con el que lanzaron el primer álbum y juntos pues alcanzaron la cima con el Fire, este temazo que todos conocemos. Una de las cosas más relevantes de la entrevista sin duda es ese disco que nunca se hizo con Jimi Hendrix, así que él nos habla un poco de esa colaboración que tuvo con Jimi Hendrix, pero al final por temas de agenda nunca pudieron sentarse a grabar, pero hicieron unos jams en Nueva York. Y bueno, también habla de su carrera en el cine, básicamente también en la película Tommy de los Who, y tuvo algunas otras participaciones. Así que bueno, escuchemos juntos el legado de Arthur Brown para celebrar su nuevo material discográfico Long Long Road. Cómprenlo, está increíble. Le mandamos un abrazo al queridísimo Arthur Brown. Muchas gracias y ya se la sabe, gócela.
The first question is, do you remember your first contact with music and how did you start in the world of rock and roll?
In the world of rock and roll was through Elvis Presley and Little Richard. And of course, they had a radio station in England, Radio Luxembourg, that when everything in England where there was only a very small amount of modern music played in those days, they had, you could listen to Radio Luxembourg all night, and so they played the American hit charts, and so that's where I got introduced to rock and roll.
That's amazing. How do you feel when you discover this kind of music? For example, Elvis or Little Richard.
I mean, it was like a different world because England was still very European in its musical taste and very English. Eh? And so the idea of people leaping around the stage and, being very active and dancing and the rhythms pounding out, African style rhythms actually, aren't they? So that was, it was like fresh air because I was born during the Second World War, and there was, England was poor. There was not much money. There was, people were still in this kind of state of shock, and they were looking for some other way to look at life, and they were thinking, where has our whole way of life led us to? This big war. So that when the American music came in, it was something new. It was a very positive and very energetic. Yeah. And so that was great.
Wow.
And of course, new hairstyles, new clothing styles. Hey.
Yeah, that's really cool. Next question, talking about the beginning of rock and roll in England. How was the local scene in the UK during the 60s before the explosion of rock and blues? I can imagine you and many other bands start in small venues playing for just a few people.
Yeah, there was a lot of semi-professional music in those days. We went through the skiffle craze, which was one led by Lonnie Donegan, and the rock music was played in bars, and only gradually did it get to be bigger. And of course, in a lot of ways, initially they were just copying the American music because that's what they were listening to. But then you got people in there who drew from the English music hall tradition. Some people dressing up like the Undertakers. There was a band called the Undertakers. They dressed up as if they were going to bury people. So it was very much like characters from Dickens with big, tall black hats, black suits, long, long thin trousers, and there was also in the later part of the rock, there was Lord Such, who also liked to screaming Lord Such, and he was between the two because I think it's right that he had Jimmy Page in his band for a while, from Led Zeppelin later, he was famous for. And so Lord Such had a great band, but his visual performance was like being at the music hall. Then, of course, we had our Elvis, which was Cliff Richard, and it went through the same kind of periods it did in America. Elvis would come out with Jailhouse Rock. Little Richard would be doing let me see. I gotta rock it up. Tonight. Hey, Saturday night, and just got paid. Fool about the money, trying to save. And that was like a powerhouse, like a volcano standing next to you. And then that would be accompanied by, in America, and to a certain extent England, the idea that, that's a violent music. So the next thing was the media would close down a bit. And the next thing, that the artists that came up looking the same as the big rock stars were more family oriented. And they'd be singing ballads and, very nice ballads, but it wasn't like in America where they had Carl Perkins, who even in the time when everybody else was doing these ballads, he was still rocking it out. But we did have various people who did not obey the normal. We had, I remember a little later than that, PJ Proby, who came over from America and had been the stand-in Elvis when Elvis wanted to not sing anymore a bit. When he was recording, PJ Proby would come in and do the singing. And he had a great voice, and he was a showman, extraordinary. He looked like what was later a hippie. He had a big ponytail, long hair, dressed like one of the Three Musketeers, and was totally outrageous. And actually really good too. I thought he was, and that sort of acted as a bridge because people started to think, well, if he can do that, I'm sure I can do something as different than normal people.
That's very important. That I think that's very important because they inspired to you to create something special, and you create a revolution. Not you and other people like the Who, for example, Led Zeppelin. I don't know, John Mayall, for example, Cream. You create something special. You change the rock and roll in general and the life of many people around the world. That's really cool.
Yes, and you mentioned the Who, and I remember Pete Townsend in one interview telling everybody that his model was a band called the Shadows,
Yeah.
and they were largely instrumental, and they did rock, the old style of rock. And Townsend said, but they were the real band that was on the road. They were a working band, and so he got his influence from that. And the Who were always have been a working band. They do a lot of concerts.
Yeah. Talking about Pete Townsend, I read in Psychedelic Baby magazine that Pete Townsend was the producer of your first record. Can you tell us how was that experience and if you remember the recording process of your first album?
Oh yes, yes. I was. Let me see. I had come out of college,
Yep.
where I was singing with what was the beginnings of a mod band called the Southwest Five. That one came to an end, and I formed my own band, the Crazy World, which was a multimedia band. And so it was a show which at the time was not normal. And so, for instance, in the year before us with Pete Townsend, we had 3 concerts in the whole year.
Wow.
Because we were so different from what other people were playing. I must say we had exceptionally good musicians. And then at a certain juncture, I joined what was called the Ramon sound. They later got a 3-year record deal. And at the time, I was their co-lead singer with Clem Curtis. And the company came down and said, we want to record you, we want to give you a 3-year contract. So they changed their name to the Foundations. And 6 months later, they were #1 in England with a soul record. But when they said 3 years, I thought, oh, 3 years doing this soul music, which I love dearly, but I preferred what we were doing with the Crazy World, which was more experimental and psychedelic. And so I turned it down, and there were the Foundations at #1, and we were still earning £35 for a concert.
Wow.
But by then, we were the kind of the house band at UFO, which also featured, of course, the Pink Floyd, Soft Machine, Mark Bolan. You mentioned all the stars that came up were played there. And we were kind of the regular band. And the audience were very wishing you to do things that they hadn't before, and sing about things they were concerned about, which was how do we live in a different way? How can we base life on play rather than work? Can we have a different kind of politics, which is more concerned about human beings than money? All these questions. And it was at one of those concerts that Pete Townsend came down. He was invited by the guy who had been the publicist for Brian Epstein. And he came down and went away to the record company, which was Track Records, who were doing Hendrix and The Who, a very experimental record company that also knew how to be commercial and how to sell things and to be aware of all the current trends in art and music. And so that was the background we were in. Townsend came in and they said, interesting. And Townsend said, yeah, he's a performance artist. It was strange because people didn't talk about those things then. He said, but he's a performance artist who can sing. And so they said, well, let us hear something. What are you suggesting? And so Townsend came and said, come to my studio.
Wow.
And we'll make some demos. And of course, we did a lot of music from our set, which included a lot of the pieces from Fire, the album, the Crazy World album. And Townsend played it to them. They said, wow, yeah. And so they came down and saw me performing and the band performing. And that was why we were taken into their under their wing.
Yes.
And we had, while Townsend was playing them there, we were playing down there, and all the major record companies knew that in America the underground had managed to become a commercial phenomenon. And so they wanted that in England. So they came down and they were talking to us, and we thought, oh, well, they don't understand what we're doing or why we're doing it. So we're not really interested. But we got taken out to a lot of very fancy dinners.
Wow.
And well, they told us what they were going to do for us. And in the end, we turned down everybody except that we decided Pete Townsend was a performing artist himself, and the Who were, they were a band that went against the grain. They were pretty outrageous, and we said, well, this man's father was a classical composer, the leader of Track Records, Kit Lambert, and so he must know about music. And our keyboard player was also a trained classical player. So he thought, that's good. And we thought Townsend, when he was telling us what he thought a record should be and how could we go about things, really was very impressive and helpful. He wasn't telling us what to do. He was suggesting things. And I remember one tune, Give Him a Flower, and then another one, what was it called? Spontaneous Apple Creation. And when it came to record that, I said, well, Pete, I haven't quite finished it. And he said, oh, what haven't you finished? I said, well, I haven't written a tune for the verse. He said, well, why don't you speak it? And so oh, okay, I'll do that. But he also encouraged us if we came up with ideas to stretch in a different direction. He was right behind it, going, yeah. That's like, and of course, Kit Lambert was actually the main producer, and Pete Townsend was the assistant producer. And Lambert loved excess. He loved excess and loud noise, and his father was the classical composer. So we'll be playing our music, which in those days the keyboard player played a Hammond. We didn't have a guitarist, but it was early days of Hammond. It was a small Hammond, and so gradually, as the recording went on, we managed to move up. They came out with the new organs, and the C3 became or the B3 initially. And Lambert would just take the track as it came out and slide the control slider, which governed the tones and the volume, into until it hit the red. And then everything was distorted. And then he would record that and then alter it. And so, for instance, we would be in about 8 years ago, we went in the studio with some very good producers. They could not get the same sound. You know, people don't use the old sliders anymore. They were trying to get it with the modern equipment. Could not get the sound that Kit Lambert had, because he was a visionary, you know, in terms of listening and being able to picture what could happen. And so that was a very growing period for the band and myself. For myself, I would sing, and I'd sing it the best I could. And then occasionally Lambert would say, well, because he was well accustomed to classical singing, why don't you just try and do it this way in that place of the tune, and let's see what we can get from that. This is good what you've done, but we need something more than that. And so it was a growing experience, not only to learn how to operate recording equipment, what to do in the studio, who to keep quiet, who you were supposed to be listening to when you were actually talking to one of the other musicians about fish and chips or whatever. So yeah, it was a very, and then the drummer was playing in a style. Lambert took the record over to America when it was finished, as far as we were concerned, and they said, well, this was Atlantic Records. They said, well, you know, this is not the rhythmic style that our audience are going to respond to. And so Lambert came back and said, look, we've got to make some alteration. And he said, I know one thing we can do, which is to put on this record strings, because then we change the emphasis and we can bring in different rhythmic things along with the keyboard. And so, and also the brass sections. So you had strings and brass like a classical lineup, and that was, I think, one of the very first doing that in the studio. So it was a very, very creative position, and Townsend and Lambert would say, right, this tune you've got, when it comes to the last part, I notice that sometimes you sing different lyrics. I want you to improvise for the last 5 minutes. And so I would just make up the tune and the melody and the feelings all on the spot. And that was a very great introduction to, you know, you can do that and people will listen to it. Because I love doing the improvisation.
I am the god of hellfire, and I bring you fire. I'll take you to burn. Fire. I'll take you to learn. I'll see you burn. You fought hard and you saved and earned, but all of it's gone to burn. And your mind, your time, and mind, you know you've really
Yeah, I can imagine in those days the technology was different than in these days. Where I mean, went to the studio is a challenge. You don't have these multi effect pedals like in these days. And also, I read in an interview that you are one of the pioneers that start to use the drum machines. I don't know if that's true.
Yes, that it was later than later than Fire. Fire was recorded partly in '67 and then mainly '68. Um, but the drum machine I first recorded with in '72,
Wow.
'73, and it was a totally different experience.
Yeah.
We were the first band in the world to base ourselves round a drum machine and have no drummer. I played
Yeah.
the drum machine and sang. And so that became, it took 5 years before people in our audience thought, well, I can make a band like that. And so it was 3 to 5 years after we did our own first album produced by Dave Edmunds, the rock and roll singer, um, with electronics, drum machines, synth players, and
Wow.
you know, it was yeah,
Yeah.
it was again an amazing learning because sometimes the drum machine in those days, if you had a very hot night in a club where they didn't have windows, then there was sweat falling from the ceilings,
Yeah.
and sometimes it would fall into the machine, and the machine might go off. And
Oh.
when you're trying to play your set, it will go, no, 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 I'm going to play what I want. And
Yeah.
so you'd have to make up things on the spot to go with the drum machine.
Yeah. Oh, well, you are the godfather of short rock. You start to combine the theater with rock and roll. So tell us what inspired to combine these words, theater and rock and roll.
Well, I'd always, since I was young, I loved theatre. Um, and the the thing was that in '65 I went to Paris, my first professional engagement, played in Montmartre and stayed in Montmartre for 12 months. And it was a very wild club. Um, and so one evening I was uh, in the dressing room, and this woman brought in a small child, her child about 8, and he said, "Ah, you should black out your teeth, paint your teeth black." And I laughed and said, "Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah." Then when I got home, I thought, well, I wonder what effect that would have. So I did the next night, and the audience, because we had some good lighting,
Yeah.
they were all, oh, oh.
Wow.
And and then one night in the hotel, they'd had a wild party up the corridor. And when I woke in the morning and opened my door, there was a crown with candles on it.
Uh,
And so next night I took that down to the club, blacked out my teeth, and lit the candles. And so the audience loved that. And then when it came back, I went back to France to England, um, and we were playing down in the UFO.
hmm?
Uh, I had I was living in a kind of bohemian household, and there was an artist who lived there, Mike Reynolds, and he expressed an interest in doing our light show for the band. And so we used to talk a lot, and we talked about. Um, we were both interested in, magical symbols and things like that. And so he said, "Well, I can paint those onto your costumes." So I got these
Wow.
robes, and there were all magic symbols all over the costumes. And between the two of us, we thought, well, candles on the top of a crown is one thing, but why don't we try a plate with petrol in it, gasoline? And so on the first night it exploded, um, and thereafter I had a leather strap went round my head, and then there was a screw went through the strap through the bottom of the plate, and then onto the I would screw it tight, and so we did that, and that for one night was great. After the second night, I became aware that, well, the heat is traveling through the screw onto my skull, and it's very painful. We must find
Yeah,
something else.
I can
So
imagine.
we thought of the idea of making it like these magic symbols, going back into pagan magic, um, pagan beliefs, and all of that, and bringing them uh, and the way of life more in connection with nature. And so we put the horns up, and then put some flame material inside the horns,
Yes.
and had the plate. We had the plate, but then put a small cushion underneath it, but the plate would wobble. And so it started, on one night it wobbled on, and the petrol set my clothes on
Oh,
fire. So
oh,
it was like, okay, what do we do now? So then the strap underneath, I couldn't make very tight because it meant then I'm trying to thing like this. So what we did was we said, well, why don't we put from this mythological, magical stuff two
yes.
small wings down either side? They'll stop the plate from wobbling. So then I had a helmet with wings and flames coming out of the top with
Wow.
these magical symbols. And everybody thought, wow, that's a pretty strong image.
Yes, yes, it is.
And, and of course, I had been watching on TV uh, the English music hall,
Mm-hmm.
where they had old fashioned Dickensian theatre as well as songs, and some were very strange songs. So I started to introduce my own version of those into the act, and also um, there was these at that juncture there was travelogues on TV, people traveling around Africa,
Wow.
and film of the witch doctors and their dancing. So I started to learn the dances from the witch doctors, and they became part of my stage act.
Wow.
And and so the whole thing came together, and I had read all of Shakespeare's plays, and I read various other theatrical things, and so I had tried out with mime, and I brought in a kind of serious approach to it. I practiced a lot and studied from different people.
That's amazing because you create something special in general for rock and roll. You screaming Lord Stutch, also screaming Jay Hawkins. You're like at the pioneers of this movement, the combination of theater with rock and roll, and also the show. I mean, thanks to you guys like Alice Cooper or Kiss. Even in these days, we have these black metal bands with the corpse paint, the paint in the face, and you're pioneer of that.
And now on Top of the Pops, as we get into the next Arthur Brown song, here's his new band, the Sandy Dalby lead guitar, Andrew McCulloch drums, Gooch Harris organ, Desmond Fisher bass, and Paul Brown electronics wizard. Like the other one we heard Arthur Brown wrote this to, Touch of the Mood is here, and this is the title.
The sunrise on the killing has left me in the way. I'm looking round to find the lights. Won't you let me see the day? Anywhere a man turns, he can't help but see waves of destruction and insanity. Deep on his soul raises a plea. Understand. Oh,
Arthur Brown's Kingdom Come.
Hey everybody, this is Ben Ward from Orange Goblin here. You're listening to Doomed and Stoned Latino America. Cheers.
Explosions in my brain shatter me to drops of rain falling from a yellow sky, orange faces through an open eye. Stop me, hold me like I care. Stop me, voices from all those that were. Don't want to criticize you, no. Eyes can never tell you lies. It's someone. And well, our fans send us two questions about some myths. So I want to ask you if that's real or not. And I'm going to read these questions for you. The first myth is real that you had the idea to create a band with Jimi Hendrix?
Yes.
Wow.
The thing was that we, when Fire became #1, we played quite a few festivals where we were in the top 4 of the billing, and Hendrix was also. He also, of course, did work with Track Records, and actually, when Fire became a hit, it was because Hendrix went round all the what were then called black stations and said, "You got to play this track," and so put on Fire, and so all of those stations started to play Fire, and it was partly because of Hendrix. And we had a period in New York where I did a lot of jamming with him, and we had a time down a club in New York called Steve Paul's Scene, which was where after you'd played in New York, or if you came to New York for a dinner and wanted to go out and experience some music in a different kind of way that wasn't the band doing their set. It was different musicians coming together. So one night we had John Lee Hooker, Jimi Hendrix, myself, and and so we jammed, and we did maybe an hour and a half set, made up completely, not based on any songs. And so about I know at that juncture, Jimmy really liked Vincent Crane's keyboard playing as well. He liked me. At that time, he didn't like his own singing. He liked me as a singer and a frontman. So he called me into his hotel, and he said, "Why don't we make a band together?" And he said, "I'm thinking of the people in the Experience and your keyboard player." So that would have been the band. And he wanted to have tapes of Wagner in the background. So he was already like John Coltrane, looking at what are the backgrounds of the music I'm playing. There's the blues, there's African music, and European music. So he wanted, he loved the tones of Wagner. And so he wanted to have Wagner playing in the background while we were doing our stuff, and a huge projection show of lighting and stuff, rather like there would be now. But obviously the was slightly different. And so that was, we were beginning to do that when suddenly I was on tour. The keyboard player, somebody kind of spiked him, and he had to go back. He was in the mental hospital for, I think, 6 months. And that was, by that time that came round again, and I started to think, well, I love this idea, but I do have ideas of my own, of a different kind of band. And if Vincent isn't there, that's a different kind of lineup.
Yes.
And so I didn't follow it up. And the next thing was Jimmy was doing with the trio, the blues trio.
Oh, yeah. Well,
back to his roots.
Yeah. Another this kind of myth is, if you know that George Harrison in the Beatles session says, "I'm like Arthur Brown, the god of hellfire, and fire an asha tree and run around the studio." Did you know that? Yeah, I read that. I don't know if that's true, but I read that about George Harrison. I am the god of fire like Arthur Brown.
Well, I do remember when we were making the record, and we were doing work in Abbey Road,
Yeah.
and the Beatles were running around with a candle on their heads, shouting, I am the god of hellfire."
Well, another question for you is, if you remember, if you tell us about the experience of participating in the movie Tommy by The Who. How was the experience to participate in a movie?
Yeah, that was I'd only ever been in 2 movies before as a film extra.
Oh, really? Tell us more about that.
One was, yeah, I don't talk about it much, but one was holding the head of the horse in one of the horses next to Beckett in a film called Beckett, all about the times of the English kings and the battles that they had in England over the throne. And the other one was a film called This Sporting Life, and that one was with Richard Harris. And I sat at a table in a nightclub. I didn't say anything, but that was one of the scenes. So I had no real knowledge of making movies. And Ken Russell was, of course, a very extraordinary man, great energy, great capacity to visualize what he wanted. And so I gradually realized that's how he worked, because I was initially going to do one of the roles. One was the one that Elton John did. Pinball was
Pinball Wizard, yeah.
Yeah, and the other one was the one that oh gosh.
Don't worry, but at the end you play the role of the priest, like.
Yeah, well, oh gosh, yeah. Eric Clapton was in there playing the preacher,
yeah,
and for some reason he didn't want to do it after a certain point. They'd already done some of the filming, so I came in and I sing the last verse and the last section and do a bit of wild dancing in that. That's what I do in the film. And so what was fantastic was Ken Russell would say, right, give me what you got. So, oh, that's right. First of all, he said, right, you're doing this. You've got now, from the Marilyn Monroe grotto scene, we're going to give you the dancers. So now I want you to go into the room 2 doors down the corridor. You've got to work out the dancing. You've got to work out what you're going to, and you've got to be back here in half an hour and we'll film it. So we went in there, made up little moves and things, then came back, and Ken Russell said, right, off you go. So we did it, and he said, no, that's not it. So I did it again. No, that's not it either. Go and talk about it. Go and talk about it. Do it again. 23 takes later, I decided. I thought, well, this is never going to work. I'm getting bored with it. I'm tired, and it's early in the morning, and so it was at that juncture when I was in the middle of thinking that he said, do it now. And I did. And he said, that's it. That's it. And the thing is that when he makes a film, he watches you doing it and he sees you doing it in his mind. And if you don't reach the right level of intensity or integrity in it, that's it. So you do it again. He's got it in his mind. He's also watching you to see if you're really into the part. And if you're not, so by the time we'd finished, it was what he wanted. But I got a call 2 months later saying we've decided we'd like a slightly longer scream at the end. Would you come in? Can you come in 3 days at 8:30 in the morning and do one of these screams? Well, I'm usually almost just gone to bed then. So it was a bit early, but I went in, did one take, and that was it. And so, and I will say about Tommy, when it first started, Pete Townsend was writing an opera, I think it was going to be about China, and it was called Rael. And he wanted me to be the lead character.
Wow.
And it was Kid Lambert who said, no, Pete, we've got to keep this. This is the change that you're making with writing. We've got to keep it for the band. And he said, yeah, but I've written it with Arthur Brown in mind. And so, you know, Lambert was the one who was in charge of management of money. Yeah. And so I didn't do the Tommy, but I think, you know, Roger Daltrey is an amazing Tommy. So there you go.
Yeah, talking about movies, you released a new video that it's part of the movie The Black Room with a special guest such as Carmina Peace, Brian Auger. So tell us a little bit about this new version of Fire.
Oh, yes. Well, of course, the version that has just come out of that record is with Carmine Appice and with Brian Auger on keyboard, who was one of the great keyboard players and somebody that I really enjoyed with. And then it's got James Williamson from the Stooges. So it's got a very varied and very talented band, if you like, behind it. And I believe it's true to say that it was put out by a record company, Cleopatra.
Yeah, Cleopatra, yeah.
They have, for instance, in my case, they asked me, would I like to do a horror album? And so there was a horror album. And they said, well, we'd like you to do the voice in England. So we did it sort of long distance. They put down tracks with the different people, and but as we went through it all, the characters, the musicians, changed from track to track. So on the first track was B.J. Harvey, the psychobilly guy, who's fantastic. And so I wrote a song with him, and we produced that. Next thing I knew, Alan Davey, ex-Hawkwind, yes, was in there, and he was coming up with quite amazing music. And we would talk with him long distance, and why don't we look at this? Why don't we introduce this instrument? All of that. So it's been a very interesting process indeed.
There will be no way when we are dead.
There are no special copostatic effects used on this record.
Yes, there are.
Hola, this is Mario Lally from Yawning Man and Fatso Jetson, and you are listening to Doomed and Stoned Latin America. Stay well.
Welcome to the Vampire Club, a place where you can find your dreams. Forget guitars, fast cars, and guns. Listen to your victim screams. And if you wanna go to the heart of history, that's right. And get yourself a different taste of humanity. Yes, if you wanna know what it's like to be free, you need to drink a little blood with me. Come on. Welcome to the Vampire Club. We're not only here for kicks, like a wheel that needs a hub. We come to get ourselves a fix. And if you're discombobulated soul, shout out at me. Oh, baby, I'm a sinning sucker. Please have mercy on me. I feel like there is nothing real in reality. You need to drink a little blood with me.
And also, I have a question. I can imagine poetry is an important part of your life. I remember that you read some poems for the record of Bruce Dickinson from Iron Maiden, The Chemical Wedding, inspired by William Blake. Can you tell us a little bit?
Oh, yes. William Blake. I've always loved William Blake, and I'm just in the middle of reading a new book about him that is just explains him in a totally different way. But Bruce used to come down and watch my second band, Kingdom Come.
Yeah. Wow.
And so it was because of that he helped I got once, and he helped me a lot then, and it led into being on his record company, Sanctuary, and him getting me to do some work with his solo material.
That's really cool. Also, well, this is a long question. I'm going to read this. At this point in your career, you have released 17 studio albums. I know each one is very important and all have as a concept behind it. Can you resume briefly for young audience this amazing journey, and which ones are your favorites?
Oh,
I know it's a tough question. 17 albums, yeah, it's a tough question.
Well, the one that had the story, if you like, was obviously the Fire album.
Yeah.
Although Galactic Zoo also has that, and the album Vampire Suite has that. The which ones of the other ones has it? Oh, I gotta think.
Yeah, I mean 17 albums. Yeah, I can understand. It's a lot.
There's about 5 or 6 that has one, and they all come together actually as part of one story, if you like, which is what we tell in our new stage act. We're using a lot of different technology, an absolutely astounding show, and we have taken the lead from we played some of the Fire album, but the way that Kingdom Come played things and the electronic side of it was what we drew on for the overall tonality of it. And so that would be do you want to know the story?
Sure, if you want. Yeah, we can.
Well, the story is about somebody who's looking around. He can't make sense of the world anymore. It's moving too fast, and it doesn't appear to be geared to human beings. You know, it's and so he goes into this state, and he's living in. To him, the world is a nightmare, and so there's part of his mind takes on a character, and it's a female voice, and it says, "There's only one way out. Go bathe yourself in fire." So next thing he's surrounded, and he's gone down, and he's burning in the fire, and the characters come out of the fire of the normal kind of mentality that we use, the dualistic mentality, yes, no, good, bad, black, white, and so first thing to come up is the voice that says, "I am the god of hellfire," and so that's where that song came from. Then a voice comes in and says, "God, brother, you lie." And that is his opposite twin, who's not hellfire. It's the fire that is warm, creative, light, full of light. And that's another song called "Come and Buy," and in the wears different costumes. So you get the idea of a character, although obviously in a way it's just one aspect of the person who had the nightmare in the first case. And so then that disappears, and then there are other characters who come in, one representing love and also romantic love, one representing knowledge of the everything in the universe, one representing a teacher, and in the end, he comes to a character or a voice that is he is speaking, saying to this character whose story is the whole album, child kingdom. Catch the drops where war lies bleeding from a child of fire, and a tree full of dew drips where your mind falls into mine, and we cling to our fine religion. New thoughts from old, and it's a kind of, he's in this garden. It's not the Garden of Eden, but it's the garden where he experienced wholeness, beauty, and the darkness of life. So that's the story.
Wow, and it's amazing because your music is not just the innovation in technology or riffs or just sing. You have a concept behind. You have a message for all the people, for young, for old people, and I think that's part of your legacy as Arthur Brown. It's not just another record. Each record is different. You can find a concept behind these records, and that's your legacy. So thank you so much for that, and thank you for explaining us that concept behind your music. So also, I'm going to read this because my English is not the best. So I wrote something for you special. I hope you like it.
Oh, thank you.
So your legacy is undescriptible for rock and roll and metal. You inspired acts like Alice Cooper or Kiss. The idea of combining the theater and special effects is part of the DNA of the industry. You're a pioneer, and we feel grateful to having you here today. So thank you so much, Arthur Brown.
Oh, thank you. It's been a very interesting interview, and we'll be able to come after. Maybe we come and do a tour, probably to tour Mexico.
Hopefully. So what's next for you? I mean, I know it's a pandemic, but what's next for Arthur Brown? Do you have any plans for tour or for record another album?
We have one that will be coming out very shortly now on the Prophecy label, and we've just done. He does each year a concert for all his artists, and he has a lot of artists on his label, and they are, varied. A lot in the stoner rock, but also, and some heavy metal and folk. Really, it's not necessarily pretty folk. It's folk that they try and go back in the period that they're singing about, the pagan period. And so we did our set there, and we were concerned because we're not necessarily a band that people would put in that group. But initially when we came out, I mean, I've got wings, I've got all of these things on. They was like, they looked a bit stunned, But soon they were jumping up and down and shouting, and everything got very nice and wild. So I think now we're about to we're discussing anyway. They're doing a concert for his label again.
Wow!
In America in December of this year. And so we're discussing that now, going over to do that. It is a show called A Human Perspective, is what we do. And it has a lot of electronics in it. It has, jazz influence. It has folk influence. We bring in as many modern influences as we can. And it tells this story as we went on through. And we also, with that show, we have a tour booked in England doing theatres so that we can have the proper lighting and the curtains and all the projections will be successfully done. So that's that. And
May and June.
Which?
May and June.
Oh yeah, that tour is May and June in England.
In England,
okay. And with that show in America, we're discussing an American tour as well. And also for Prophecy, I'm about to do the next album.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a very experimental album. And we hope in both the experimental album and this new Prophecy, we may actually have come up with a hit record. So they're slotting in lots of radio play and everything. So we'll see about that.
Oh.
That'll be if we do that happens, say after June, I'll be 80. So having a hit when you're 80, that's all right with me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. We will check your social medias. Arthur Brown on Instagram. God of Hellfire Actual is your Instagram. So thank you so much, Mr. Brown, for your time.
Thank you indeed.
Yes.
Lovely, lovely.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hi, I'm Dave from Zulatron Records, Electric Moon, Zone 6, Intercosmos and Krautzone. And you're listening to Doomed and Stoned Latino America. Have a good time.
Trying to poison me with mushrooms. Oh, she wanted to use her power on me. She trying to poison me with mushrooms. She wanted to use her power on me. All I wanted to do was love her, but that gypsy woman put the blues on me. I said, darling, we had an agreement. I could try my luck any time I wanted to put that money down. I said, oh, we had an agreement. I try my luck every time I put that money down. But the blues was your only love. The blues and mess around. I wonder about that day that love flung a craving on me. Gary from Yazoo City. Oh, I wonder about that love that flung a craving on me. a cheap